made at the beginning of 2025. I wanted to start off 2026 with a redraw because I wanted to see how much improvement there's been in my art in just a year. It can be really hard to see improvement in the day-to-day of drawing, but I find it's really encouraging sometimes to redraw old art so you can see how much your skills and your art style has improved and changed in just a year. I started out with sketching the girl and her cat. I kept the pose the same, which allowed me to get through the sketching stage fairly fast so that I could move on to line art. I lowered the opacity of my sketch layer and then made a new layer above that and began to draw over my sketch with black. I use a line art brush that has pressure sensitivity, so basically the more pressure I use, the thicker the line, the less pressure I use, the thinner the line. I don't always enjoy drawing line art, especially when I do it digitally, but lately it has been kind of fun. I've been having fun with adding more details with line art, such as clothing folds or hair strands. And also it's fun to thicken the line art a bit in areas where there is more shadow, and also to thin it out in areas where there's more light. It can be fun to explore with line art, and it does make the process a little more enjoyable for me. However, I do prefer to draw line art traditionally in my sketchbook. I find that there seems to be more freedom in doing it traditionally. Maybe it's just because I have a little more control over the pen than I do with the digital brushes, but I think it's mainly because I'm not as much of a perfectionist with line art in my sketchbook. I've made some drawings in my sketchbook that I like a lot, and the line art is far from perfect. And I also think I've gotten better at line art over the years. One of the main reasons I think I've disliked line art for so long is because I was bad at it. My hands were always shaky and the lines never looked good and my hand would always cramp. So I think just as I've drawn more and done more line art over the years, I've gotten a little bit better at it. And so I think that's part of why it's been a little more fun and enjoyable to draw line art lately. Once I finished the line art, I moved on to drawing the background. Now, I didn't keep the background the same as the one in the original art piece. When I made this drawing last year, I had originally wanted the girl to be standing in some sort of forest, or at least I wanted to have some trees in the background. But I just couldn't figure out how to do it back then and eventually gave up and settled for a pretty plain background. That's one of the reasons why I never really loved the art piece. However, for this redraw, I decided to go for it and I started to add in trees into the background. I didn't draw line art for them, I just went in with the colors I wanted and began to play around with drawing the trees. Procreate has a good brush that I like to use for clusters of trees or for bushes. It's called Paper Daisy and it can be found in the brush set labeled Organic. It's a quick way to get tree leaves without having to individually draw them, and I really like how it looks. For the back trees that are a little more distant, I just duplicated one of my tree layers and made them a little smaller and lowered the opacity of that layer. I did this a couple of times so that it looks like there are more trees in the background. I like how it turned out, and I definitely think that it helped achieve the forest-like background that I originally wanted in the piece I made in 2025. Next, I moved on to coloring in the line art. For this, I set my line art layer to reference and made a color layer under the line art layer so that I could color in the line art easily. For the colors, I first color picked them from the original piece, but I didn't like how some of them looked. For example, the hair color looked a little too saturated, so off camera I fidgeted with the colors to get them to my liking. After that, I made a new layer above my color layer and made it a clipping mask, and then set it to multiply. This is my layer to add shading. For shading, I picked a slightly desaturated purple color and began to apply it to places where I figured there would be shadow. I was originally going to cel shade the girl and the cat and then blend out the shadows, but after a little while I just went ahead and started to blend out the shadows. Another thing I don't like about last year's piece is the rendering. The shading just looks off and the highlights look very odd to me. I like to blend out my shadows, but I struggle to find the balance between sharp and soft shadows when I render. I want to improve my rendering more, and I pushed myself to work on it more with this drawing. I think the shading took up the most time with this drawing, but it was worth every second. Recently I saw a video where a gal was talking about using grays in painting, and she was using some paintings by different artists as an example to show how different colors work to create certain effects. I don't remember exactly what she talked about, but it made me want to start experimenting with colors more. It sounds fun to create a painting by using only different shades of one color, or to create a painting only using complementary colors like red and green. There's just something fun about experimenting with art and learning from both the good art and the bad art. Like every artist, I know I have a lot of art that I won't ever let anyone see, but bad art is still art, and it does still help us improve, even though it doesn't feel like it helps at all. I also think experimenting with different art supplies is interesting, and creating with them can be really fun. I think my favorite art supply to work with in traditional art is acrylic paint. I love to paint, and acrylics are really fun to use, though they can be quite frustrating at times. And my least favorite art supply to work with is colored pencils. Now, I only say this because trying to get a good blend with colored pencils while also trying to make them appear neatly on paper and make them a little more opaque is frustrating, and it hurts my hand whenever I try to do this. I haven't colored with colored pencils in quite a while. I only really use them to sketch out drawings. I don't color with them very often. I would like to use them again, but not at the expense of hurting my hand and my wrist. Anyways, so what are your favorite and least favorite art supplies? Once I finished my shading layer, it felt like the piece was lacking, so I made a second shading layer and began to add self shading to different areas of the piece. I don't do this very often since I always think it will look bad, but I ended up really liking how the shading turned out once I added the self shading. It added to the piece in a good way, and it made the shadows have a little more variation instead of it all looking soft. Once the shading was done, I made a new layer, made it a clipping mask, and set it to add. Then I began to add highlights with a light yellowish color. I find that highlighting with warm colors is quite fun, and it adds a pretty and subtle effect. I blended some of the highlights and left others untouched. This added variation. I also lowered the opacity of the highlight layer. I thought I should be done with the piece, but I wanted to add just a little bit of rim lighting. To do this, I merged all my layers and set the layer to reference. Then I made a layer above it and filled the canvas in with the light yellow I used for the highlights. Then I set it to add, then clipping mask, and lowered the opacity before using Gaussian blur. This added a gentle rim lighting to the piece, and I just erased the light where it didn't belong. And off camera, I also added a small amount of noise to the entire piece. And that's it, the artwork is finished. So first, here's the artwork that I made in January 2025. And here's the artwork I made in January 2026. And here they are side by side. When I first saw these pieces side by side, I did not know what to say. I was shocked at how different they looked, and they are only a year apart. It brought me encouragement and joy to see that there had been improvement in my art. I'm really glad I did this redraw. I definitely recommend finding some old artwork and redrawing it. It's always nice to see some improvement, even if it takes a while before you see it. Anyway, let me know what you think of this